Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar from GE Additive. My name is Mike Cloran, and I'll be the moderator for today's session, and it's on raw material quality requirements for the additive industry. We'll get started in just a second, but I'd like to share just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you look at your screen at the bottom, you'll find multiple engagement tools that you can use. All of these tools they're resizable, they're movable, so feel free to move them around and get the most out of your desktop space. You also have the option to expand the slides or maximize them to full screen. You can do this by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. We also have a variety of help materials, and they're available in the resource list. And I encourage you, if you see something that you like or that you think would be helpful, to download any of the resources, and hopefully you'll find them useful. So that's all. Now that we've gone through that, how to make the best of your viewing experience, let's meet our presenter. Today we have 𝗬cie 𝗂. He's the product manager for metal powders at AP&C, and AP&C is a GE Additive company. 𝗬cie will be joining us in just a second to look at the quality requirements for metal additive. You may have questions for 𝗬cie during the webinar, and to ask questions, you can use the Q&A section located on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of the questions as you have at the end of the webinar. So that's it for me. So let's get started. 𝗬cie, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Good day, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm really happy to be able to host that webinar today. Unfortunately, we're not in person at Formnext. Better luck next year, I hope. So we'll go over what on the AP&C side, and as a powder manufacturer for the medical industry, what we believe is critical, the supply chain.
Okay, bear with us. It seems like we're having some technical difficulties. 𝗬cie, we can't hear you. I don't know if you're muted or if something went wrong with your audio, but you can take a minute and try to reconnect. So this would be a good time if people online maybe take a look at the resources and see if there's anything in there that is interesting to you. And again, we'll get back. It's just a second.
Good day, everybody. Sorry I was logged off. Hopefully that will be the last time. So again, as I was saying, we are all here to talk about how the supply chain for the medical industry and additive need to be strong. Medical can gather a lot of the advantages of AM in terms of making parts that are better, that are more, that have the right porous structure to be able to make the right parts. But how are we going to be able to bring that supply chain to meet the industry requirements? We believe that it can be spread in 4 different pillars. First, quality. You need to have the right quality system to be able to follow that stringent industry and understand in the medical application. Also, you need to service your customers. You need to be able to be there to help them in that journey, because additive is new. Handling powder is often not something that most companies were used to, and there's a lot of collaboration that needs to be done for that to happen. Also, you need a performing product. A product that will meet the requirements, will behave well in your machines. And finally, as the industry is planning strong growth, you need to have collaboration towards that growth and make sure that you're attacking it on the right side. Why is AP&C here to talk about that? Well, obviously, AP&C has been a powder producer for the industry for more than 15 years, and we're really focused on making our product the best that it can be. And core of our business is titanium, which is the lead material for medical additive. So we're a quality-focused industry with system certification for aerospace, AS9100, and also a medical device, ISO 13485. We're part of Additive, which has a strong network to service you. Also, our products are already qualified for serial production by medical and aerospace OEMs. And AP&C has always been known and is really proud to be ready to collaborate with its customers to make sure that we help you overcome the challenges that powder handling can bring, and make sure that you have a safe facility and success with your parts. So the first pillars I want to talk about is quality. And quality, the first thing is that we have to separate what is quality system certification versus product certification. Quality systems certification is really making sure that your quality system has the right certification and controls the different process needed to make your product. So that includes obviously the manufacturing process, but more than that, it includes the purchasing process, the change management process, the sourcing, a lot of things that are critical that usually are well defined within the ISO or AS certification bodies. But having a good quality system will ensure that you have a product that is repeatable, that is stable, that improve over time, but on a process point of view. It doesn't mean that your product is going to perform well perfectly in the technology you selected. This comes with product certification. A lot of things are available on for the public, so obviously ASTM, AMS, or military specs. Within GE Additive, we've got the PAPS and GAPS that defines our products. And really, product certification is the key to ensuring you've got the right product for your application. And both are linked. Without the proper quality system, you cannot have a product certification that makes sense. So within the quality system, there's really four things that we believe are critical and shared into most of quality system for aerospace and medical industry. The first of it is traceability. What does traceability mean? Well, it means that at any point in time, you can look at a lot of powder, and know where it traveled through the supply chain, through your process. So you know from which raw material it comes from, on which equipment it's been produced, by which operator, under which conditions, what were the matrix that you measured, and that is true for all the different steps until it shipped out to the customer. Why is that important? Well, first, those data gathering ensure that you monitor your process, that you know very well how it behaves, and that you can continuously improve it. It also critical for root cause analysis, or to identify if part of the process is not performing the way it's supposed to be. Traceability also ensures that you are in control and that you always do the same thing and that you didn't miss any steps. That's really the cornerstone of the 4.0 implementation within the powder industry. One good link to that is also having a laboratory with a LIMS, a laboratory information management system, that allows to have a database that can monitor the data of your products at any steps that you've made in measurement. The second thing that we believe is critical is change management. Obviously, at some point, you will have new equipment, or you will change some of your equipment. You need to address that change properly within your system. And the things you need is a qualification plan. You need to obviously plan what you're going to do by setting metrics, measure things that you can measure to make sure it's going to be functioning the way it's supposed to be, the way you planned it. Then you need installation qualification, IQ, make sure that it's installed properly. Operation qualification, make sure that it behaves properly. And the performance qualification, make sure that over time it can continue to give the level of quality required. And when this is done, it can get approved to release for production. Obviously, that includes the internal approval, but also the external approval, the approval of your customers. And that's where communication with customers and understanding their quality requirements becomes critical. Because we're in a young industry, things are moving, things are improving, so change happens. So controlling those change to make sure that your customer are aware of them, but also that they know you're in control and trust your quality. It's going to help a lot. And also, we cannot expect to declare every small change. The big part of the change approval is making sure that you address the risk of that change and that your customer understands what you're changing and what's the impact on their products. That's why on the AP&C side, we always do what we call the 6P analysis, trying is there any impact on people, on product, on procedures, on the process itself, on performance, on pricing. And this allows us to have a good scope of the change we're doing, address the right metrics to control it, and have an honest discussion with our customers about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And this is linked to the next part that is important, which is risk management. Obviously, when we're dealing with powder, even more titanium that is vastly used in the medical industry, we're talking of material that is reactive. Some sizes are even classified flammable solids. So there's some risk in handling those powders. So understanding the risk properly and putting mitigation to lower the risk is critical. So I've got some example here. When you're handling titanium or aluminum, for that instance, reactive materials, you need to have inert atmosphere when you're handling. But just saying that is not enough. Obviously, you have to have sensors to monitor that and also sense it within the equipment, but also outside the equipment. Make sure that if you have leaks, you're going to monitor it, know it, and act upon it quickly. But also in all additives, one of the big risks is the fact that the powder, let's say, is kind of alive. It's easy to contaminate a powder if you want. When we're talking of a bar to make traditional manufacturing, you drop something on it, you clean it, it's done. With powder, if you drop anything in the powder, well, good luck removing it. So that's why having a real understanding those risks and putting mitigation in place. One of it is dedicated equipment. Having equipment that are dedicated to some materials prevent the risk of cross-contamination. Also, material selection, ensuring that the way you build your systems and the material you select that it will be in contact with powder will not cause any erosion and any contamination to the powder itself. And also that accounts for the supporting equipment around it. Making sure that they also cannot contaminate and having closed system where the powder is not affected by anything because it's all managed closed. That's all things that are really critical. And how do you achieve those risk assessment and risk management? A big part of that is the PFMEA, the Process Failure Mode Effect Analysis. That is really useful, but can be very difficult to maintain for small entities. Obviously, it's going in depth into the process and see how it can fail and what's the impact of those failures and putting mitigation to prevent those. So obviously, it's a day-to-day thing that you need to follow, but it's really critical. And the last thing that complete the quality is product certification. So we talked about it a little bit earlier. So product certification is really defining your product to make sure that it's going to behave well in the application it's been selected for. So what you can define a product within the product certification. So here, just taking an example. So obviously, there's size distribution, either by sieving or laser diffraction. There's this flow rate, either with Carnet or all flow meters. There's also density, measured with the density cup, again, with all Carnet flow meters, but also tap density or picnometry, true density, or skeletal density, depending on how you call it. Chemical composition is also very important to understand that, make sure that you have the right product, but also that they have the right chemistry to make sure that your end part is going to have the right chemistry that's going to allow enough recycling of it. And cleanliness. We talked about the risk of contamination, so having cleanliness method to me is important. What we often use at AP&C is based on ASTM F1580, which is a titanium powder specification for medical that has a very simple but effective way of quantifying cleanliness. With that, I'll turn to Mike on the first poll question of today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Friedrich. So we like to poll the audience and get your point of view on a subject. And today, the first one is, what is the most critical part of an additive feedstock certification? Is it chemical composition, particle size distribution, flow, morphology, density, or other? So again, just select the one that best suits your opinion. What is the most critical part of an additive feedstock certification? Is it chemical composition, particle size distribution, flow, morphology, and density, or something else? I'll give you just a second to make your selection, and then hit submit after you select. So let's take a look. Wow, it's pretty evenly distributed among top two are chemical composition, particle size distribution, and then you got 25% morphology, and then nobody selected others. So, Friedrich, is this what you typically would see, or what's your opinion on this?
Well, that's the kind of result I was expecting, because obviously if you don't have the right chemical composition, you won't have the right part. And if you have a size distribution that is completely wrong to what you already used in the past, it can have an impact on your process. Flow morphology, a bit harder to, flow at least, is a bit harder to measure and to see the actual impact, because it's not all machines that have the same requirements for that. But for me, the other, that is something that is critical. I'll explain why. Because if you have, by other, what I had in mind is having a representative sampling. If you have a sample that is not representative of the full lot, even if your test says that chemistry, size distribution, or flow are good, if it's not representative of your lot, you're going to have issues anyway. So that's why, to me, part of a product certification, something that is critical, is having a complete lot that is homogenized or blended and been sampled with ASTM V215 method to make sure they have something that is representative. And also that your testing equipment has been well calibrated and under control. And again, that links the quality system, the way that to make sure that you've got a process that is stable and well controlled with product certification. You need both to really have the right product. In the end, the product certification is done by the supplier. The quality system certification is done by a certification body. So you really need to have trust in your supplier that its quality system is strong enough and robust enough to perform the product certification, so that you make sure that each batch is going to be consistent and conforming to what you need. Then we'll move to the second pillar, which is service. Obviously, additive is a young industry with a lot of growth that is planned. And you cannot expect to know everything and to learn everything the first time around. And also, it's not just one material, one machine that's going to be great and perfect for all type of application. There's a lot of the realm of what you can do in additive is vast, but the possibilities in terms of type of machines, type of material, type of PSD is also very vast. And you need to select the right one to have the best business case. And that's why having an organization that can service you through the full ecosystem of additive is really critical. And by that, I mean, yes, having a powder that matched with some parameters that goes on the machine, and also the post-processing. That's something that AP&C and G Additive can bring. You've probably seen, or you can ask for data sheets that link really machine with parameter, with powder, with post-processing, to give you a guide of what the capability of that full ecosystem. Why is it great to have that? Well, it's not just that it's already a milestone and you know you're going to print. Obviously, you might do fine-tuning of any of those for your actual part, because it's not true that one parameter will be good for all parts. But this can ensure that if the machine evolves, if the powder evolves, if the parameter evolves, you know that the entity that does that is going to verify that it works with the full chain, and that you can benchmark that pre-evaluation from the supplier for your own and try to minimize the internal cost. Also, as I was saying, additive is not alone in the market, and there's a lot of ways to make parts. And that's why it becomes critical to have suppliers that can service you in the different modalities of powder metallurgies. So yes, there's LPBF, there's the powder bed fusion, and EPBF, the electron beam powder bed fusion. But also BED, HIP, MIM, and biojetting are powder metallurgy that use often the same products as they're using, but sometimes in different particle size solutions. And combining particle size distribution within different technologies, but that are produced at the same time by the same process, will probably help you to have a better price in the end for your parts, and also to benchmark the strength of each of those processes for your own use. Just for laser bed fusion, there are several PSDs that are available for different machines, 1545, 1553, 2063. So I want to take some time to explain to you how those can have impact on your process. Well, first, PSD is the driver for many properties of the powder, particularly for lightweight materials and reactive materials like titanium and aluminum. First, because of price. As we show here in the graph, when we produce powder, we've got a bell curve, Gaussian curve of a fairly wide distribution. And then we cut the size to what you need for your application. So obviously there's off sizes to deal with and to manage. Broader size distribution that you're going to buy, obviously less off sizes. It can help on the yield that we're going to sell, and then the price can drop. Also, it helps on flow properties. The flow is driven by surface interaction, and coarser particles have less surface, so surface interaction is a bit weaker. That improves flow. So a coarser particle size will flow better than a finer particle size. Also, the flow property is also driven by the content of very fine particles, but that's not the only thing that's going to drive that. It's also going to drive your soot generation, how much you're going to have ease of transporting and conveying that powder, receiving that powder. Then there's reactivity because of surface area. How the powder will react is driven by the amount of surface available per mass. And as I show here on the left, with the same volume of particles, if you cut it in smaller pieces, you've got more surface or more reactivity. We'll go more in detail in the next slide about that, so I won't talk too much here. Then there's oxygen content. For reactive materials, on most metal, in fact, there's always a native oxide layer in the surface. And for titanium, it really drives the oxygen content of the particle size solution. So unfortunately, the the transfer didn't show it properly, but the key message is there on the right. So with the same raw material, we can have a 45106 that's going to end up around 0.07% of oxygen, and the 1545 at 0.10. What's missing there that you don't see is the 020 for main application at 0.17. So you see how site solution has a strong impact on oxygen content. So if you are targeting application where you want lower oxygen because of the part you're targeting, or because of the increase of oxygen during your processing, and how you want to control that to recycle more often, well, selecting the right site solution can help a lot. But obviously, powder is not alone in the AM process. You need to have the right process parameters to properly trim that particle size solution you're going to select, because energy density and build rate will be influenced by that. But also your part design, depending on the layer thickness you're trying to print with, the surface finish you're targeting, the feature resolution, thin walls that you want to build. Some particle size solution might not be available or not be possible for your application. So it's not this is the best and this is the worst. It's really a question of what you're trying to print and how big and what cost you're driving will be driving all that. To us, it's really a decision that needs to be taken at the early stage because it got strong cost, design, and EHS influences. And well, it's not just about your machine and your parts, but also your full plant. If you're dealing with something that is more reactive, obviously your plant needs to be designed differently. That brings me to reactivity and how different particle sizes will have different properties. So on the bottom of the chart here, we've got 𝗬cie𝘂 results for different size solution. And one thing that is important, or at least that has an impact on your process, is the classification for transport. So you see that 1545 is classed as a flammable solid, while the other sides are not. That doesn't change that the other sides are still combustible dust. It's possible to ignite them, but it doesn't reach the criteria for transportation classification. That can change a lot on the type of package you can use, the methods to ship those packages. So they can have some impact on your cost. The other thing to me that's important is the MIE, the minimum ignition energy. Basically, the lower this value is, it says that the powder is sensitive to an extrinsic discharge. So really working with grounded equipment with under inert gas becomes critical for those sizes. And you see that here, 1545 is much more sensitive than 1063, but 1063 is still sensitive to extrinsic discharge, but 45106 is not at all. So selecting that can impact a lot how you design your plants and all that. And then there's the explosion severity, which is often defined by the KST. Basically, the velocity of the pressure wave if there's a dust cloud that is ignited. And you see that in all cases, you can ignite the dust cloud, but it has strong to low impact. When you compare that with aluminum, people often think that aluminum is more dangerous and more reactive than titanium. And you see that indeed for similar size. So we checked the 21563. The aluminum has a larger KST, so will have more damage will be done if it's ignited. But its MIE it's much higher, so it means it's harder to ignite those kind of dust clouds. So again, understanding your product is critical to designing your plant and your safety measures, and that's only available through good services from your supplier. That's will teach you that, will show you the data he has. That supply you with the material you need to make the right assessment. Which will bring us to the next poll question. So I'll give the mic to present it.
Okay, great. Next poll question is, what feedstock specifications do you use for purchase? Is it your own specifications or customer specifications? Is it ASTM or AMS? Is it supplier specification? Or do you just order to a part number? So again, the question is, what feedstock specification do you use for purchasing? Is it your own or customers of yours? ASTM or AMS, supplier specification, or do you just order to a part number? So I'll give you a few seconds to make your selection and then hit submit. And then we'll look at the results. All right, so let's look at the results. Wow, I don't think it could be more evenly split. It's 33.3% for my own specification, 33.3% for ASTM or AMS, and then a supplier specification rounds it out. So nobody orders to a part number, but it's completely 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for the other options. Friedrich, is this again something that coincides with what you believe or what you expected?
Yeah, indeed, and I think that shows well how the market is improving. A few years ago, we would have seen some part of people that order just to a part number. Powder was often considered as just a consumable, and then people didn't look at it. And more that people understand and go in depth with additive, we see that people move towards having a detailed specification, and even the part international specification states that. And I think that what's important here is that, yes, suppliers should be able to give you specification that define their products so that you understand what you're buying and why. ASTM and AMS are a good basis, but be careful because often they're very vague and encompass a lot of things that not necessarily define exactly what you will need. And making your own specification is always good, but you need to have a supplier that will be ready to discuss it with you to make sure that what you're demanding makes sense for your part, for your machine, but also on an auto manufacturing point of view, because you don't want to be cornered into a specification that doesn't allow you to grow that business in the future. And that brings me to what needs to be in a powder specification. So obviously, there's chemical composition. You said it before, that's what's the most critical, most important for you guys, and it is. Particle size solution, density, flow rate. This is all the standards that we see everywhere. Morphology and porosity, to some extent, are important, but they're often more process-driven and not really lot-to-lot driven. So this is more in a supplier qualification point of view can be critical. But things that are often forgotten is cleanliness, defining the manufacturing route and the raw material to be used. Change, as we talked earlier, all the quality aspects of the process to make the powder. So change management, document records, certification, and also packaging. What will you require? Obviously, that can be complicated. That can be very different from one supplier to the other. So it's important that you discuss with your supplier about your spec. And as a good supplier will give you their comments, will make sure that you do have the right specification and will comment why this and this works or not. And in the end, specification cannot be fully static. As international standards evolve, and they evolve quickly presently, because the maturity of the industry is taking, well, obviously internal specification need to be addressed and follow those international specifications. Now I want to speak about the product itself and how having the right technology to have a product that is performant in your application is critical. So things that we need to look at for me is having something that is consistent from one lot to the other to make sure that next batch you receive, you have the same performance and you don't need to tweak anything in your system. Obviously, it needs to conform to the specification we just defined, but also that minimize failures, downtime, and reworks. And this one is a bit trickier to establish within specification. It's more qualifying the supplier and understand how its powder behaves in your system. So our view of additive is that there's really three things that are included in a specification that impact your products. So first, there's a chemical composition. That includes, obviously, the alloy you're selecting, but also the interstitial, the amount of oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, Because even more when we're talking about titanium and in the medical industry, oxygen will drive the mechanical properties. So it's important to monitor that and define that properly. And as particle size distribution, we already discussed pretty much about that, so I won't go into details. There's everything that I consider the dynamic behavior of the powder, so how it's gonna be easy to spread on your powder bed, how it's gonna be able to see, how you're gonna convey it. Usually that the rheology of the powder, there's a lot of metrics that are used for that, but it's a bit hard to know how it's really gonna behave in your system. So it's more question having indicators, and usually morphology, density, and flow rate are things that will drive your decision without being perfect indicators. And then there's everything that concern risk mitigation. We talked about cleanliness, but also manufacturing rules and lowering porosity. So we'll get in more details for that a bit later. So, and for technology to make powder, there's a lot that's available. What has become the gold standard for titanium in medical is plasma atomized for many reasons. So it's been proven technology used for many years. The first thing is that it uses a pre-alloyed raw material. Gas atomization, like IGA also does, so this is something that we share with that technology. Pre-alloyed raw material ensure that you benchmark the years of the supply chain of titanium that's been optimized to have quality products. You take that same quality product and you just transform it one step further into a powder. You don't change the alloy chemistry, you just change the form. And using a wire compared to a rod is even better because it's also a semi-finished product, so you remove even more the risk of having contaminants in your feedstock. Plasma atomization is known to give very high sphericity, high packing density, high purity, and very low porosity. We'll show the next slide a bit why. But the fact that we're using a wire to make that powder ensure that we separate the melting phase from the feeding phase, which is not the case for crucible or IGA atomization. Simply because by doing that, we can always have the right energy to mass balance to have the right powder. And also with wire atomization, we never need to empty the crucible or finish the rod. The operator can stop the process at any point in time and ensure that we have a consistent product and always select product quality over performance of the equipment. It's our very safe process that is melting only the tip of the wire. So that's ideal for reactive metal and high melting point metals because we've got lower time at high temperature compared to a crucible, so less chance of contamination with either surfaces that it can touch or contamination in the gas you're using. The fact of using a plasma or a gas for atomization means that you have a longer residence time at high temperature. That means that you give more time to the particles to naturally reach the spherical shape you're looking for. Also, plasma atomization is using a lot less gas than gas atomization, so that means you've got less entrapped argon in the particles, less porosities, but also the longer residence time at high temperature allow the argon to escape from the particles. Also, in any processes of atomization, at the atomization point, that's where you have the highest density of particles, so more chance of collisions. And when you're using a cold gas, like in classical gas atomization and quenching the melt, well, collision will create particles that are non-spherical. In plasma atomization, you're going to allow those particles to recombine into a spherical shape. So that helps a lot on controlling the particle size and ensuring that it has the right shape you're looking for and low porosities. Why am I talking so much about porosities? In the AM process, you're going to print, you're going to create porosities anyway. Is the powder really that much of an effect? No. It's a sum of defect. Any process is sum of defect. We're trying to minimize all we can to make sure we have something stable and that works well. And one of the things that is known is that and has been shown, is that even if you have argon in your powder and if it ends up in your part, if you do it, you're going to see that the pore is closed, but it's still there. The argon is not going to diffuse through the matrix, and it's not going to react with the matrix. And papers have shown that if you put heat or stress, it's going to grow back to the original size, and porosities are known to be fracture-initiating sites. So lowering the argon content in the powder, the porosity in the powder, helps to meet, as we will show here, very good fatigue properties that is comparable or even exceed rough or cast parts for 𝗬cie𝘂. How do we measure porosity? That's a bit more tricky because we're talking very, very low amounts. Some can use picnometry, skeletal density. The challenge with that is it's very good for pure metals, but when you're talking about alloys, the porosity level is so low that the variation of density from within the alloy composition can be enough to mask the porosity level. The CT scan, but obviously precision of that can be a challenge. So what we like to use is metallographic cross-section analysis. When you automated the image analysis, you can have a good statistical result. So we're showing here the difference between 1545, where we have 0.03% of the surface area that is porous with a median circularity at 96%, compared to 2063. Again, very low pores and very good sphericity, and even coarser. Coarser usually is more challenging in terms of porosity. So we'll have a little bit more here on this 45106, but it's still very low at 0.1%. Often I've seen in specification people stating max 2%. So we're talking very, very low porosity. That, again, lower your risk of the powder in your process. That being said, one of the things that we talked about is the dynamic behavior of the powder. And plasma atomization brings sphericity, which is great. But that's not the only factor that will impact how the powder will going to be processed. There's a lot of the flowability and spreading behavior that is linked to the surface interaction between particles. And AP&C and its plasma atomization process has an advantage towards that because the particles are treated as a patent treatment in situ directing atomization to lower that interparticle interaction and agglomeration. It brings powder that flow better, that have higher packing density, but also that is easier to dedust, so lower satellite content, lower reactivity. It also doesn't stick as much, so it allows easier sieving. We had customers that said that it really reduced the time of sieving, it eased the handling of the powder and the conveying. One example on the right of when you look at the D10, D15, E90, you say, well, that's basically the same powder. It's good at minus 15. Yeah, it's a little bit more fine than the gas atomized. When you really look at the shape of the curve, you see that gas atomized is cut sharply at 25 microns with a tail of very fine that you cannot remove, that is sticking there. With the AP&C treatment, we can remove completely the 010 and having a powder that is really well sieved, well dedust, and that will ease processing in the part. Because this is something that you often don't see in publication, because measuring what the rejection rate of my parts, how long it's going to see, is not something that people study. And it's hard to monitor on a large scale. Usually when in large scale that you see the impact of that. So it's a feature that is really unique. And that is really made to optimize the powder for these stringent additive requirements. So that ends up our technology section. And before moving to the next section, I'll give the poll to Mike for the next question.
Okay, thanks, Friedrich. The next question is just a simple yes or no question. Is your organization ready for large-scale production of additive parts? It's simply yes or no, whether your organization is ready for large-scale production of additive parts.
And ask yourself, what does that mean? So are you ready on an EHS point of view, on the capacity, is your supply chain ready for that? So that's the kind of thing I want you to think about.
Great. Thanks for the clarification on that. So let's see what the results are. And we'll move on to the next. So about 2/3 say no, they're not ready for large-scale production, but about 1/3 says they are ready for large-scale production of additive parts.
Yeah, I was expecting something like that because very little companies are in large-scale production. There are a few, but they still have their challenges. And I think that going into mass production in an environment and an industry that is as stringent as medical, you need to have collaboration. Because, in fact, there's a lot of issues you're going to have with powder handling that the powder producer already had the challenge to. And also looking at how much your supply chain is ready for that transition. A little bit of, and also we talked about growth in the first slide of the presentation and how this industry is expecting a lot of growth. But growth is not about having the funds to have the growth. You have to have a supplier that is ready for that. And often having multiple sites will help even more when talking reactive materials that has some risk to it. Multiple production equipment because it helps on many aspects, space for growth. But also, is your supplier looking to scaling their process or duplicating the process? Because scaling is a whole different business. Scaling up is difficult. And also, do they control the technology or they rely on a third-party supplier to get their equipment? At AP&C, we own the technology we use for production of powder. It's our own design, our own technology that within a few months we can have a new reactor installed. Also, you see here one of our two plants. We made it in kind of a hand shape, and each finger that you see can basically be dedicated to a product, meaning that we have less chance of cross-contamination. We can continue to grow without jeopardizing the current products and make sure that we have something that is safe for everybody. And safety is also about understanding your product, putting the right measures, and automation. Having closed loop under inert atmosphere, as we do at AP&C, is critical to lower the risk. And it's something that we can help you because something that we tackled. We atomize more than we have capacity for more than 1,000 kilograms per year. So obviously, there's a lot of powder that we handle, and some of it is much more dangerous than what you're used to handle. But also, it's not just about growth. It's about understanding the market and the complexity. The 𝗬cie𝘂 powder, when you start to look into it, there's a lot of things words that come out. So is it reactive? Is it export control? You have a safety data sheet. What is REACH? And things like that with years of experience that we tackle and we can help you. Help you why? Well, we have the different packaging solutions for small scales or for large scale with drums. We also have equipment that we can customize for you for your large scale, so like sieve blenders, but also have small tools like stamping probe, as I mentioned initially, that are available, trying to ease your going through the mass production. We're also all about sharing the information we have through SDS trainings, Q&A session, technical audits, and also where we have some solution on recycling to make sure that we maximize the use of that powder. And in the end, it's not finished. Yes, we are where we are right now in terms of capacity, in terms of products, but we need to continue to do R&D and innovation. And we have that ability. We have one reactor that is dedicated to new alloys. So we think it's very important because if you want to launch something new, you don't want to put in jeopardy the rest of your business. But at the same time, you want flexibility. And having an equipment that is identical to production equipment to do R&D ease the introduction to market because you don't have to reprove that it's going to work on large-scale equipment. But it's also about looking at continuing to improve the technology to get better price and better product in the end. And that's why AP&C this year has had a worldwide breakthrough with plasma atomization of a melt instead of a wire. So it brings the quality of plasma atomization in terms of powder properties with the flexibility of crucible melting. That means that we can use either pre-alloyed or also elemental raw material that allows to have a quicker on-demand composition, but also opens up to materials that were not available before as a wire. So one example of that is the titanium aluminide that AP&C is now producing and qualifying with our partners. It's the first plasma atomized titanium aluminide powder and has great success with it. Obviously, plasma melt atomization will build higher productivity. So that's something that's going to come up for the future to continue to ameliorate our collaboration with our customers. So in the end, before we look at the question, just a glimpse of what AP&C can offer. So we're talking titanium, nickel superalloys, also aluminums, also, as I mentioned, constant capacity on 2 sites with multiple equipment, and that is available for all the market of additive and powder metallurgy, in fact. So I'll be ready to take a few questions. I hope you have some.
Okay, thank you, Frédéric. We did have a few questions here that I want to get to. You hear this question a lot. There's always a question about the reusability of powder after you've sieved it. So how often can we reuse the AP&C powder before we need to change it?
Yeah, this is a good question, and everybody's looking for a simple answer. And unfortunately, it's not a simple answer. Because it's not all about material itself. It's all about the process and the part. So in laser powder bed fusion, the powder is what you eat is the part. So the powder has some heat to it, but not that much. So usually there's very little pickup. But it depends on your part design. So if you have something that has a lot of porous structures to build, obviously there will be a lot more powder particles close to that structure that can pick up oxygen. It also depends of the system you're using. Some work with the vacuum, other on inert gas. And what's your recycling strategy? Are you gonna add virgin material on a constant basis, or run all your material and then reuse it and run it all again? So clearly this is something that needs more in-depth analysis and discussion. It's not an easy answer like that. And the good thing is that with AP&C powder and the surface treatment that remove most of the fines, usually the powder is behaving well and doesn't accumulate soot, if you want, during the processes. So it helps to be able to use it more often.
Okay, thanks. The next question somebody submitted is, what are your recommendations for the storage of powder?
Yeah, storing powder is something that a lot of people ask us, and it depends of what powder to start with. So as a rule of thumb for additive, you want the main danger of a powder or risk to the quality of the powder is humidity. So you want to, as much as possible, have something that will not expose your powder to humidity. But at the same time, if you're going to use it, NFPA suggests to have some level of humidity because too dry will bring risk of electrostatic discharges. Then there's that balance to deal with. And after that, storing is a lot about regulation. And this is more country to country and even city to city specific, even more when talking flammable solids. So again, that brings back the question of particle size and the type of product. If you have something that is not classified as flammable solid, often it's a bit easier to get the approval to store large quantities and the regulation that comes with it. But in short, having something that is closed, that it doesn't open to environment, is always one of the best ways to do.
Great, thank you. One other question has to do with industries. You talked a lot about the medical industry. what other industries do you see, or are you producing powders for that you're seeing are using metal powders and your metal powders in additive manufacturing?
So the core of what we do at AP&C is more for the aerospace and the medical industry. So titanium is really for both. We also have nickel superalloys that's for the aviation industry. But with the aluminum, we see a much broader range of powder of markets. So automobile is also looking into it. It's more a question of the part requirements, what you look into. Obviously, if you go to steels, which we don't produce, but AP&G Additive can still offer powders for their machine for that, then it can be a much broader scope of industries. In the end, understanding your application, your market, and the quality work requirements, to me, is the key in all that.
Okay, great. Question just came in is, what is an acceptable range for powder flowability in laser powder bed fusion machines? Again,
that looks like a simple question. The challenge is what machine? On the market, it's not all machines that have the same requirements in terms of flowability. So I'll take the Arcan EBM, for example, has really stringent requirements on flowability, and others don't have that much. But all in all, usually good flowability will improve your bed stability. So can it print with a powder that doesn't flow as well? Most likely, but is it going to be stable batch to batch, run to run? You're probably going to have more difficulties. Now, what is the limit, the min, the max? Again, it depends on what material you're talking about, what size solution you're talking about. Usually, if a powder can flow in the outflow meter, whatever the time, or at least something that's reasonable and that it's consistent, you're going to have something that makes sense to you for your process.
Okay, great. Well, so we're up to about 3 minutes, so I think we'll end it there. Appreciate your answering the questions. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you for your insights. As we wrap up today, we have other this webinar will be available on demand. If you'd like to listen to it again and pass it along to a friend or colleague. And I also encourage you to register for other upcoming webinars. And on the GE Additive website, we do have pre-recorded webinars as well. Finally, before you log off, I ask that you please complete a short survey. It'll pop up for you in just about a minute. And I'd like you to share how your experience was with us today and let us know any other topics you'd like to hear about in the future. That's it. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
Thank you, everyone.